Hello there, fellow night owls, and welcome to tonight's gentle waltz back in time. Tonight, we shall be exploring the fascinating yet melancholic life of the medieval court jester. Before we begin our journey back through the centuries, I would love to know who I have the pleasure of storytelling to this evening. If you are feeling up to it, please leave a comment sharing where in the world you are listening from and what time of day it is for you right now. Are you curled up in bed, ready to call it a night? Settling in for an afternoon nap on a long journey, hoping to catch some rest? Wherever you are and whatever time it may be, I am honored to be your companion as you unwind. If you enjoy mellow, meandering explorations of history like this one, I warmly invite you to subscribe to this podcast. We will be embarking on many a drowsy voyage through the centuries, meeting colorful characters and pondering the great tapestry of human experience, all in the spirit of bringing you some restful entertainment. Tonight, we shall be venturing back to the Middle Ages, a time of grand castles, noble knights, and powerful monarchs ruling over feudal lands. But amidst all the pageantry and solemnity of the royal court, one figure stands out for his bright colors, his impudent wit, and his mysterious smile. He is the court jester, that mischievous entertainer tasked with amusing the king and his courtiers with jokes, songs, and clever antics. You can picture him now, a lithe acrobat in a motley patchwork of reds and greens and yellows, bells jingling merrily from the tips of his floppy hood. He prances and cavorts before the throne, a study in laughter and perpetual motion. His eyes sparkle with mirth above a knowing grin as he delivers a sly quip that sets the whole court laughing. But as we shall soon discover, there is more to this mirthful character than meets the eye. Behind the jester's carefree exterior lies a poignant, often tragic story, one that illuminates the complex realities of life in a medieval royal court. The jester may play the fool, but his is a role rich in irony and contradiction. Through his tale, we shall encounter surprising truths about power and privilege, about the wisdom of fools and the foolishness of the wise. We shall see how laughter can disguise tears, and how even the lowliest individual can make their mark on history. So, make yourself comfortable, dear listener, and let me spin for you the bittersweet ballad of the court jester. Our story begins centuries ago in the royal courts of ancient lands. For as long as there have been kings and rulers, there have been those whose job it is to entertain them. In the palaces of pharaohs and emperors, fools and jesters crafted their arts of amusement, winning favor with their antics. The Egyptians had performers called dancers who used mimicry and satire to divert the royal household. In ancient Rome, the Emperor Galerius gave a regular fool called Marius a seat at his table where he was free to joke and cavort. Even the Bible speaks of royal fools, as when King Achish accused David of playing the madman in his presence. But it was in the Middle Ages that the jester as we know him truly came into his own. In the courts of medieval Europe, troubadours and minstrels evolved into fools and jesters, their quick wits and bold antics easing the tedium of courtly life. From the 12th century onward, no royal entourage was complete without an impudent entertainer. These medieval fools were more than just simple clowns or buffoons. Jesters were men of many talents, skilled in music, acrobatics, storytelling, and above all in comedy. A quick tongue and a ready joke were the jester's stock in trade. With a nimble wit, he could transform any situation into an opportunity for laughter. But the path of a jester was always a precarious one. To amuse a king was to walk a tightrope, balanced between mirth and mockery. One false step, one joke too far, and the fool could tumble from grace. In a society rigidly structured by rank and title, the jester occupied a unique position. He was often of low birth, yet his wit gave him a privileged place at the royal table. He might rub shoulders with princes and dukes, yet he remained always an outsider, set apart by his gaudy costume and eccentric ways. This was the paradox of the jester, at once insider and outsider, confidant and scapegoat. His was a delicate dance indeed, as we shall see in the tales to come. But first, let us examine more closely the way of the fool, the craft and traditions of this most peculiar of CALLINGS. Picture, if you will, a typical royal feast in a great medieval hall. Long wooden tables groan under the weight of sumptuous dishes. Nobles and ladies glitter in silks and jewels as servants scurry to and fro with flagons of mead and wine. At the head of the hall, on a raised dais, the king and queen preside in all their splendor. And then, with a clatter of bells and a raucous cry, in bounds the jester to work his merriment. All eyes turn to this curious figure in his trademark motley. From head to toe, he's a riot of color, a patchwork of bold hues, red and yellow and green, topped by a hood, decorated with donkey's ears or the comb of a rooster. Around his neck and at his wrists and ankles, bells jingle with every caper and spring. Sometimes he carries a prop, a mock scepter or a pig's bladder on a stick. His very appearance proclaims him a man apart, a licensed transgressor of the normal social code. Now watch as he goes to work, this master of foolery. Perhaps he will start with a somersault or a handstand, drawing applause for his acrobatic skill. Then some juggling to further warm the crowd. Balls and clubs and fruit, whirling in dizzying arcs. But it is the jester's tongue, not his limbs, that are his true feat of dexterity. He will launch into a barrage of jokes and puns, spinning outrageous stories, hurling good-natured insults. Sacred cows are his favorite target. He will parody the church and the aristocracy, poke fun at current events and local scandals. Nothing is off limits for this voice of mischief, except, of course, directing his barbs too pointedly at the king himself. That way lies the dungeons, or worse. The jester must play his cheekiest jests on safer targets, using his wit to subtly comment on the foibles of those a rung or two below the royal level. Perhaps he will engage in mock flirtation with the ladies at court, his audacity drawing giggles behind fans. Or maybe he will play at riddling with a knight, frustrating the poor man with his nimble nonsense. Whatever his antics, the jester's goal is always to amuse, to transport the court to a world of whimsy and delight beyond the everyday. It was no easy task, this business of professional fooling. Jesters had to be jacks of all trades, masters of a dozen skills beyond mere joking. A fine singing voice was an asset, as jesters were often expected to perform the latest ditties and ballads. Skill at an instrument or two also helped. Jesters might play the viol or pipe to accompany their songs and stories. Dancing, miming, sleight of hand, all were tools in the jester's kit of tricks. The more varied his abilities, the better his chance of tickling the royal funny bone. But the jester's most essential talent was his silver tongue. In an age when most people were illiterate, the jester was prized as an entertainer who could spin stories and clever turns of phrase. Many were poets in their own right, authors of ditties and rhymes that have come down to us through the centuries. Take, for example, the English jester Jonathan Pemberton, who served the courts of Edward IV and Henry VII in the 15th century. Pemberton was renowned for his quick wit and his way with words. In one famous incident, he was asked by Queen Elizabeth Woodville to compose a poem on a lady's hair that resembled a beard. Without missing a beat, Pemberton rattled off this rhyme. Her face is fair, her beard is brown, a marvel sure to make men frown. But yet in sooth it is no beard, it is a mask for to be feared. With verbal gems like these, jesters won fame and favor in their day. But as we shall see, not every fool fared so well in the tricky business of royal humor. For every Pemberton celebrated for his cleverness, there was a jester like poor Thomas Skelton. Skelton served in the Tudor court of Henry VIII, a monarch notorious for his hot temper and changeable moods. According to one story, Skelton once displeased the king with an ill-timed jest. In a fury, Henry ordered his fool to be executed. As he was dragged away to his doom, Skelton cried out, "I leave all my goods to the next fool that will take my place." The dark quip apparently touched the king's own morbid wit, and he was moved to pardon Skelton on the spot. Such was the razor's edge on which a jester danced. But perhaps no figure better illustrates the pitfalls of the jester's trade than Malcolm Stirling, a Scottish fool who served both James I and Charles I of England. Stirling, known as Malcolm to the court, was renowned for his bold jests that spared no one's dignity. Once, when the Archbishop of Canterbury complained that Malcolm had insulted him, Charles I replied, "I believe you, Malcolm, for he speaks truth of all men." But Malcolm's loose tongue eventually got the better of him. In 1637, during a tense confrontation between King Charles and his treasurer, Malcolm made the mistake of cracking jokes. The king, unamused, had Malcolm stripped of his motley and permanently banished from court. The once celebrated jester ended his days in poverty and disgrace. Stories like these hint at the darker side of the jester's life, the perils that lay beneath the surface of his jolly exterior. For all his privileges and fame, the jester walked a precarious path. He might play the merry fool, but his was often a poignant, even tragic lot. In the next chapter, we shall delve deeper into the pathos behind the jester's smile. We shall explore how for many fools the motley was a mask for a life of hardship and heartbreak. The archetype of the sad clown was more than mere artistic fancy. It was the stock reality for many a medieval jester. So settle yourself more cozily into your pillow, dear listener, and let us peer behind the jester's jolly facade. His story has more to teach us yet. As the sun sets over the castle walls and the bustle of the royal court fades into the evening, let us delve deeper into the vibrant yet precarious world of the medieval jester. These enigmatic figures, with their quirky costumes and quick wits, walked a tightrope between amusement and offense, forever dependent on the whims and fancies of their royal masters. The life of a court jester was a paradoxical one, simultaneously privileged and vulnerable, celebrated and scorned. On one hand, they enjoy the rare freedom of speech and access to the highest echelons of power. With their clever wordplay and cunning jests, they could speak truth to authority in ways no other courtier dared. A well-timed quip from a shrewd jester could influence a king's decision or sway the court's opinion. Take, for instance, the renowned French jester Bertrand, who served under both kings Louis XII and Francis I in the early 16th century. Bertrand was known for his sharp tongue and audacious witticisms, often brazenly mocking the nobility and even the monarch himself. Once, when King Francis threatened to execute Bertrand for his impudence, the jester cleverly retorted, "Ah, but you would not execute me without first giving me time to regret having offended you." The king, amused by Bertrand's quick thinking, granted him a stay of execution. In this way, the jester's wit served as both a weapon and a shield, allowing him to challenge authority while also protecting himself from its wrath. Yet for all their influence and fame, jesters led a precarious existence, forever at the mercy of their patrons' moods and whims. A jester who failed to amuse or who overstepped the bounds of propriety could quickly fall from grace. The 16th century English jester Thomas Brightwell learned this lesson the hard way when he dared to criticize King Henry VIII's marriage to Anne Boleyn. Though Brightwell had long enjoyed the king's favor, his boldness in this matter led to his banishment from court. The incident serves as a stark reminder of the jester's ultimately powerless position. No matter how beloved, they were still mere entertainers, easily discarded when they no longer served their purpose. This expendability was compounded by the fact that many jesters came from marginalized backgrounds. They were often individuals with physical deformities, mental disabilities, or simply those from the lowest rungs of society. For these outcasts, the role of court jester was one of the few paths to a measure of security and status. Yet this security was always tenuous, contingent on their ability to constantly amuse and perform. The story of Edmund Ashford, a dwarf jester in the court of Queen Henrietta Maria in the 17th century, epitomizes the cruelty and capriciousness that could characterize a jester's life. Ashford, who stood just 18 inches tall, was presented to the Queen as a gift, hidden inside a large pie from which he emerged to the delight and amusement of the court. For years, Ashford served as a loyal companion to the Queen, accompanying her on trips and even fighting in the English Civil War. Yet when he fell out of favor later in life, Ashford was cast aside, dying in poverty and obscurity. His tale is a poignant reminder of the jester's ultimate lack of agency. No matter how beloved or successful, they were still at the whim of the court, mere playthings to be discarded when the novelty wore off. Indeed, for all the privileges they enjoyed, medieval jesters led a strange half-life, forever dependent on the fickle moods of their royal patrons. They might dine at the king's table one night and be cast out to the streets the next. Their usefulness expired. It is this fundamental tension between influence and impotence, fame and expendability, that defines the bittersweet legacy of the court jester. These complex figures, at once central and marginalized, embodied the contradictions and cruelties of the medieval world they inhabited. In their wit and wordplay, their physical antics and daring jests, jesters served as a vital release valve for a rigidly hierarchical society, allowing for a sanctioned space of subversion and satire. Yet this role came at a steep personal cost, forever marking the jester as an outsider, a perpetual other. As we drift deeper into the realm of sleep, let us ponder the profound paradoxes of the jester's life, at once merry and melancholic, celebrated and scorned, powerful and powerless. In their haunting history, we may catch a glimpse of the human condition itself, forever striding for meaning and mirth in the face of life's cruelties and absurdities. So let us raise a glass to the poignant punchline that was the medieval court jester, a figure of laughter and tears forever etched in the annals of history. But the story of the court jester is not merely one of individuals. It is also a tale of archetypes and symbolism, of the deeper psychological roles these figures played in the collective imagination of medieval society. In many ways, the jester served as a kind of inverted mirror, reflecting back to the court a distorted image of itself. Through their antics and mockery, jesters exposed the follies and vices of those in power, using laughter as a subversive tool to challenge the status quo. This notion of the jester as a truth-teller, a wise fool who uses wit to expose hypocrisy and absurdity, has deep roots in Western culture. We see it in the biting satire of Shakespeare's Fools, in the philosophical musings of Erasmus in praise of folly, and in the subversive comedy of modern-day stand-up comedians. In each case, the fool serves as a necessary counterpoint to power, using humor to speak truth to authority and to reveal the fundamental human foibles that unite us all. Yet the jester is more than just a satirist or a truth-teller. He is also a deeply ambiguous figure, one who embodies the very contradictions he mocks. In his motley garb and his position at the margins of society, the jester is a walking paradox, at once a part of the court and yet always outside of it. He is a man who makes his living by playing the fool, yet whose foolishness often conceals a deep wisdom and insight. This ambiguity is perhaps best embodied in the famous Shakespearean fool, Feste from Twelfth Night. Throughout the play, Feste moves seamlessly between the realms of high and low, court and countryside, using his wit and wordplay to expose the follies of those around him. Yet Feste is more than just a jester. Music of Feste is more than just a jester. He is also a melancholic figure, one who recognizes the fundamental sadness and transience of the human condition. As he sings in the play's final scene, "For the rain, it raineth every day." It is this combination of wisdom and melancholy, of laughter and tears, that perhaps best captures the essence of the court jester. For in their brief shining moments upon the stage of history, these figures embodied the full spectrum of human experience, the joy and the sorrow, the triumph and the tragedy. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that continues to resonate down through the ages, reminding us of the enduring power of wit, of truth, and of the indomitable human spirit. Even as the age of court jesters waned in the 1600s and 1700s, this enigmatic figure continued to work his strange magic. In the plays of Shakespeare and Molière, in the novels of Victor Hugo and Kurt Vonnegut, the jester endured as a symbol of mirth and melancholy, wisdom and absurdity. And so the jester's legacy lives on to the present day. In the antics of comedians and clowns, in the biting satire of political cartoons, in the very idea that laughter can be a force for change and truth in a troubled world. Though the historical jester has vanished into the mists of time, his spirit remains as vital as ever. As we look back across the centuries to the forgotten lives of men like Edmund Ashford and Pietro Marcello, we catch a glimpse of the strange duality that defines the human experience. In the jester's plight, we see our own struggle to find meaning and connection in a world that often seems cruel and capricious. And in his laughter, we find a kind of redemption, a defiant insistence on joy and absurdity in the face of life's hardships. Though the jester's motley may be faded and torn, his bells long since silenced, the echo of his wit continues to resound through the ages, reminding us of the enduring power of humor in even the darkest of times. So, let us pause for a moment to remember the court jester, that enigmatic figure who once danced and tumbled in the candlelit halls of kings. Let us honor his clever words and his sad wisdom, his laughter and his tears. And in the silence of this fading evening, let us strain to hear the faint jingle of his bells still echoing softly from the distant past. As the evening shadows lengthened across the stone courtyard, the jester would often find himself reflecting on the peculiar nature of his profession. In the quiet moments between performances, when the laughter had faded and the nobles had retired to their chambers, he was left alone with his thoughts and the weight of his motley costume. The fabric of his garment told its own story. Each patch of bright color had been carefully sewn together, creating a kaleidoscope that caught the eye and announced his presence before he even spoke a word. The red patches, some said, represented the passion and boldness required of a fool. The yellow symbolized the sunshine of laughter he was meant to bring. The green spoke of the natural wisdom that grew from observing the world with unclouded eyes. And the blue, when it appeared, reminded all who saw it of the melancholy that lay beneath the surface of every jest. The bells that adorned his costume served multiple purposes. Yes, they announced his arrival with their merry tinkling, but they also served as a constant reminder of his status. Every movement he made was accompanied by sound, every gesture punctuated by a silvery chime. He could never move through the castle unnoticed, could never slip quietly into a room or depart without fanfare. The bells were at once his signature and his shackles, marking him as different from all others in the court. In the great halls of medieval Europe, the daily routines of court life followed patterns that had been established over centuries. The day would begin with morning prayers in the chapel, where even the jester was expected to attend, though he would stand apart from the nobles in his own designated space. The bells of his costume would remain silent during these solemn moments, held still by his careful posture. For even a fool knew when reverence was required. After prayers came the breaking of fast in the great hall. Long tables would be laid with bread still warm from the ovens, wheels of cheese, cold meats from the previous evening's feast, an ale or small beer to wash it all down. The jester might take his meal with the servants in the kitchen, or if he had particularly pleased his master the previous day, he might be invited to sit at the lower end of the high table, a position of honor that nonetheless reminded him of his place in the hierarchy. The midday hours were often spent in preparation. A jester's work was never truly done, for he was expected to have an endless supply of new material. He would practice his tumbling in the courtyard, perfecting the somersaults and cartwheels that would later draw gasps and applause. He might spend time in the stables, learning new tricks with the horses, or in the kitchens, gathering gossip that could be spun into satirical verse. Every moment was an opportunity to observe, to learn, to gather material that could later be transformed into entertainment. The role of the jester extended beyond mere performance. In many courts, he served as a kind of informal counselor, offering advice that might be too bitter for anyone else to deliver. When a king was considering a course of action that seemed unwise, the jester could frame his concerns as a joke, allowing the monarch to consider the criticism without feeling his authority was being directly challenged. There is the tale of the French jester who served King Philip IV. The king was considering launching an expensive military campaign against a neighboring kingdom, one that many of his advisors privately thought was ill-conceived. But none dared speak openly against the plan, for fear of appearing cowardly or disloyal. The jester, however, approached the king one evening and said, "Your Majesty, I've had the most wonderful dream. I dreamed that you conquered all of Europe, from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean, from the frozen north to the sunny south. And do you know what happened then?" The king, intrigued, asked what had happened in this dream. The jester replied, "I woke up, Your Majesty." The king, understanding the subtle message, reconsidered his plans and ultimately decided against the campaign. The jester's relationship with the other members of the court was complex and multifaceted. The nobles often treated him with a mixture of amusement and disdain, enjoying his performances while never forgetting his lowly status. The knights might laugh at his jokes about courtly love and chivalry, but they would never invite him to join their tournaments or training sessions. The ladies of the court might giggle behind their fans at his flirtations, but they would never consider him a genuine suitor. The servants and common workers of the castle occupied an interesting position in relation to the jester. On one hand, he was one of them, a worker in the employ of the noble household. On the other hand, his unique role and his access to the highest levels of power set him apart. Some servants viewed him with envy, wishing they too could speak freely and enjoy the occasional favor of the king. Others saw him with pity, recognizing the loneliness and isolation that came with his position. The church's attitude toward jesters was ambivalent at best. Some clergy viewed them as necessary evils, providers of harmless entertainment that kept the nobles from pursuing more sinful pastimes. Others saw them as dangerous figures who mocked the natural order established by divine will. There were sermons preached against the vanity of laughter and the sin of mockery, though these were often delivered to congregations that included jesters in their ranks. Yet even within the church, there was recognition of the jester's potential value. The tradition of the Feast of Fools, celebrated in some parts of medieval Europe, allowed for a temporary inversion of the normal religious hierarchy. During this festival, lower clergy would dress in the vestments of bishops, and solemn masses would be interrupted by comedy and song. It was a sanctioned period of chaos, a safety valve that allowed for the release of tensions that might otherwise build to dangerous levels. The jester's costume and appearance were not merely decorative. They served important symbolic functions. The ass's ears on his hood recalled the biblical story of King Midas, who was given donkey's ears as punishment for his poor judgment. It was a reminder that even kings could make foolish decisions, and that wisdom was not automatically conferred by rank or title. The cockerel's comb that sometimes adorned the jester's headwear symbolized vanity and pride, qualities that the jester was meant to puncture in others while embodying himself. The bauble or marotte that many jesters carried was itself a miniature jester, a stick topped with a carved head wearing its own tiny hood and bells. This prop served multiple purposes. It could be used in puppet shows, with the jester providing voices for both himself and his miniature double. It could be waved about during acrobatic performances, adding visual interest to tumbling routines. And it served as a constant reminder of the jester's dual nature. He was both himself and a performance, both a real person and a living symbol. The pig's bladder on a stick, another common jester's prop, had its own significance. Inflated and dried, it made a loud popping sound when struck against something or someone, allowing the jester to deliver comic blows that looked and sounded dramatic but caused no real harm. It was slapstick comedy in its most literal form, a way of enacting violence without actual injury. In this, it was a perfect symbol of the jester's role, to attack the dignity and pretensions of the powerful without actually threatening their real power. As evening fell and torches were lit throughout the castle, the jester would prepare for his main performance. He might apply additional face paint, emphasizing his features so they could be seen clearly even from the far end of the great hall. He would check each bell on his costume, ensuring they all rang true and clear. He would practice his opening lines, the crucial first words that would capture the attention of an audience that might be distracted by food and drink. The performance itself was a delicate balancing act. Too timid, and the jester would bore his audience, failing in his primary duty to entertain. Too bold, and he risked genuinely offending someone powerful enough to make him suffer for it. The best jesters developed an almost supernatural ability to read their audience, to sense which jokes would land and which would fall flat, to know exactly how far they could push before they pushed too far. After the performance, when the nobles had finally departed and the servants were clearing away the remains of the feast, the jester would often linger in the great hall, in the flickering light of dying candles, surrounded by the detritus of celebration. He would sometimes allow himself to drop the mask he wore so constantly. His shoulders would sag with exhaustion. His face would lose its perpetual grin. And in those quiet moments, one could see the toll that his profession took on him. The physical demands alone were considerable. Years of tumbling and acrobatics left many jesters with chronic pain in their joints and backs. The constant need to project his voice clearly across large halls often left a jester hoarse by the end of an evening. And the mental strain of constantly being on, of never being able to simply relax and be himself, wore away at even the strongest constitution. But perhaps the greatest burden was the loneliness. A jester might be surrounded by people all day long, might be the center of attention during performances, might even develop genuine friendships with some members of the court. But he was always, fundamentally, alone. He was different from everyone else, set apart by his role and his costume. He could never fully trust that someone liked him for himself rather than for his entertainment value. He could never be certain that a smile directed his way was genuine affection or merely appreciation for a job well done. Some jesters sought solace in drink, using wine or ale to numb the pain of their isolation. Others turned to religion, finding in faith a comfort that the world of the court could not provide. Still others simply endured, day after day, year after year, until age or illness or a change in their master's favor brought their career to an end. And what became of jesters when they could no longer perform? Some, if they had been wise with their earnings and careful to curry favor, might be allowed to retire to a small cottage on the royal estates, living out their remaining years in modest comfort. Others were not so fortunate, cast out to fend for themselves in a world that had little use for an aging fool. Without the protection of the court without the privileges that came from royal favor. A former jester might find himself reduced to begging on the streets, entertaining passers-by for coppers. A sad echo of his former glory. There is the melancholic tale of the English jester Harold Gray, who served in the court of Charles I. Harold had been a favorite for many years, known for his quick wit and acrobatic skills. But as he aged, his tumbling became less impressive, his jokes less sharp. Younger jesters began to catch the king's eye, and Harold found himself gradually pushed to the margins. By the time he was 50 years old, he was rarely called upon to perform. He died in obscurity, his name forgotten by all but a few historians who stumbled across references to him in dusty court records. Yet despite all the hardships, despite the loneliness and the precariousness and the constant pressure to perform, the jester's role endured for centuries. Why? Perhaps because every society needs its fools, its truth-tellers, who can say what others cannot. Perhaps because laughter is a fundamental human need, as essential as food or shelter. Or perhaps because the jester, in all his contradictions and complexities, represents something essential about the human condition itself, our ability to find humor in darkness, to speak truth in the face of power, to maintain our humanity, even when the world seems determined to strip it away. As we allow our minds to drift towards sleep, let us hold in our hearts the image of the jester in his motley, bells jingling softly as he makes his way through the darkened castle corridors. Let us remember that behind every smile was a human being, complex and conflicted, struggling to find meaning in a role that society had assigned him. And let us carry with us the jester's greatest lesson, that even in the face of hardship and sorrow, laughter endures, a small defiant light against the darkness. The jester's tale reminds us that we are all, in our own ways, performing for an audience, wearing masks to navigate the complex social world we inhabit. And like the jester, we must find the balance between authenticity and accommodation, between speaking our truth and surviving in a world that does not always welcome truth. So as you drift off to sleep, dear listener, may you dream of castles and courts, of motley and bells, of laughter echoing down through the centuries. May you dream of the jesters who danced on the edge of tragedy and comedy, who found in their art a way to transform suffering into something beautiful and true. And may you wake tomorrow with a renewed appreciation for the power of humor, the importance of speaking truth, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of all that life can throw at us. Sweet dreams. And may the ghost of jesters past watch over your slumber with gentle humor and quiet wisdom. The changing seasons brought their own rhythms to the life of a court jester. In the depths of winter, when snow blanketed the castle grounds and icy winds howled through the corridors, the jester's role became even more vital. The long, dark evenings stretched endlessly, and the nobles, confined indoors by the bitter cold, grew restless and irritable. It was during these months that the jester earned his keep most thoroughly, providing entertainment to break the monotony of winter's grip. Winter performances often took place in smaller, more intimate settings. The Great Hall, while still used for major feasts, was difficult to heat adequately, and so the nobles would gather in smaller chambers warmed by roaring fires. In these closer quarters, the jester's act had to adapt. The broad physical comedy and acrobatics that worked well in the vast space of the Great Hall had to give way to more subtle forms of entertainment. Wordplay, riddles, intimate storytelling, and songs performed in a softer voice. These winter evenings also provided opportunities for the jester to demonstrate skills beyond mere entertainment. A talented jester might be called upon to read aloud from manuscripts, translating Latin texts for nobles who had never learned the language of scholars. He might be asked to compose verses commemorating a birth or a betrothal, or to craft elaborate toasts for seasonal celebrations. In this way, the jester served not just as an entertainer, but as a kind of court poet and chronicler. Spring brought renewal to the castle and new challenges for the jester. As the snow melted and the first flowers pushed their way through the warming earth, the nobles emerged from their winter hibernation with renewed energy. Hunting parties would set out into the green forests, and the jester might be called upon to accompany them, providing entertainment during the long hours of waiting between pursuits of game. He would need to be ready with songs to pass the time, jokes to lighten the mood when the hunt proved unsuccessful, and clever observations about the natural world awakening around them. The spring also brought visitors to the court, nobles from neighboring lands who had been unable to travel during the winter months. These guests provided fresh audiences for the jester's repertoire, but they also required careful navigation. A joke that delighted the home court might offend a foreign dignitary unfamiliar with local customs and references. The skilled jester had to learn to read these new audiences quickly, adapting his performance to suit their sensibilities while still maintaining the favor of his primary patron. Summer was perhaps the busiest season for court jesters. The warm weather made travel easier, and many courts would embark on progresses, moving from castle to castle throughout the realm. These journeys allowed the monarch to show himself to his subjects, to hear petitions and dispense justice, and to enjoy the hospitality of various noble houses. For the jester, a progress meant constant performance in unfamiliar settings. The four audiences who might have high expectations based on the jester's reputation. During summer progresses, the jester might perform outdoors for the first time in months. Village greens and castle courtyards became stages for elaborate shows that could include not just the jester's usual routines, but also collaborations with local entertainers, tumblers from traveling troops, and even trained animals. These outdoor performances required a different energy, a louder voice to carry across open spaces, broader gestures to be visible to crowds standing at a distance. The summer months also brought festivals and holy days that required special performances. The Feast of St. John, celebrated at midsummer, called for particular kinds of entertainment, often involving fire and light. The jester might incorporate torch juggling into his act, or compose special verses celebrating the longest day of the year. Religious festivals like Corpus Christi involved elaborate processions through town streets, and jesters might participate in these, their colorful costumes adding to the pageantry, while their antics kept the crowds engaged and entertained. Autumn brought the harvest season, a time of plenty, but also of reflection. As the days grew shorter and the leaves turned golden and red, there was a melancholic quality to court life. The nobles knew that winter was coming again, that another cycle was completing itself. The jesters' performances during this season often took on a more contemplative tone. While still entertaining, they might include songs about the passage of time, jokes that gently mocked human vanity and pretension, stories that reminded listeners of the transient nature of earthly power and glory. The harvest festivals themselves provided opportunities for the jester to interact with common people in ways that were rare during the rest of the year. When the court celebrated the bringing in of the crops, commoners might be invited to participate in the festivities. The jester, as someone who occupied a liminal space between the nobility and the common folk, could serve as a bridge between these different worlds. His jokes might reference both courtly intrigues and village gossip. His songs might blend refined poetry with earthier folk melodies. Throughout all these seasons, the jester had to maintain his costume and props. The motley fabric, subjected to constant wear from performances and travel, required regular mending. Patches that became too worn had to be replaced, though finding fabric in just the right shade to match the existing colors was not always easy. The bells on his costume had to be checked regularly, as broken bells that no longer rang true would detract from his appearance and announce his failing attention to detail. The jester's living quarters wherever they might be, became a workshop for the maintenance and creation of his tools of trade. Juggling balls had to be repaired or replaced when they became too worn. New routines had to be developed and practiced until they could be performed flawlessly. Songs had to be memorized, jokes refined through repeated telling until the timing was perfect. The jester's work was never truly done. Even in his private moments, he was preparing for the next performance. Some jesters kept journals or commonplace books where they recorded jokes that had been successful, verses they had composed, observations about court life that might later be transformed into entertainment. These books, when they have survived, provide fascinating glimpses into the inner lives of these performers. We see their struggles to remember complex routines, their notes about which nobles had which sensitivities, their experiments with different forms of wordplay and satire, the relationship between a jester and his successor, when one was appointed, was often complex. An aging jester might take on a younger apprentice, teaching him the craft and hopefully ensuring his own comfortable retirement. But there was always the danger that the apprentice would supplant the master too soon, that the king would prefer the energy and novelty of youth to the refined skill of experience. Some older jesters tried to prevent this by refusing to share their best material with apprentices, but this strategy often backfired, leaving them without anyone to support them when age finally caught up with them. There were also instances of rivalry between jesters serving in the same court. Some larger royal households employed multiple fools, each with their own specialty or style. One might be known for physical comedy, another for musical talent, a third for clever wordplay. These jesters had to navigate not only their relationships with the nobles, but also with each other, competing for favor and performance opportunities while ideally maintaining professional courtesy. The jester's relationship with other court entertainers was similarly nuanced. Musicians, while also servants of the court, typically enjoyed higher status than jesters. They were craftsmen with valuable skills, often organized into guilds with their own rules and privileges. Jesters, by contrast, were unique individuals whose value lay in their personal qualities rather than in mastery of a traditional craft. This could create tensions, with musicians sometimes resenting being grouped together with jesters in the category of court entertainers, traveling performers who passed through. The court represented both opportunity and threat to the resident jester. On one hand, they brought fresh ideas, new acts, and routines that the jester might observe and adapt for his own use. On the other hand, they might temporarily eclipse the resident jester in the noble's affections, especially if they offered something novel and exciting. A wise jester learned to befriend these travelers, exchanging techniques and material while carefully ensuring that his own position remained secured. The education of a jester was a lifelong process. Those who survived in the profession for decades did so not just through natural talent, but through constant learning and adaptation. They studied human nature, becoming amateur psychologists who could read subtle cues in facial expressions and body language. They learned history and current events, understanding that topical humor required staying informed about what was happening both at court and in the wider world. They developed their own physical fitness regimens, recognizing that an aging body required more careful maintenance to continue performing the acrobatic feats that audiences expected. Some jesters developed particular specialties that set them apart from their peers. There were jesters known for their skill at riddles, who could engage nobles in complex verbal puzzles that exercised the mind while entertaining. Others specialized in mimicry, able to imitate the voices and mannerisms of various courtiers with uncanny accuracy, creating humor through gentle mockery that never quite crossed the line into genuine insult. Still others became known for their ability to improvise, creating spontaneous entertainment in response to unexpected situations. the international nature of medieval court life meant that some jesters traveled widely, serving different masters in different countries. These cosmopolitan fools brought with them knowledge of different cultures and traditions, different styles of humor and entertainment. A jester who had served in the French court might bring continental sophistication to an English household. One who had traveled through Italy might incorporate elements of the commedia dell'arte into his performances. This cross-pollination of ideas helped keep the jester's art vibrant and evolving. As midnight approached and the castle settled into silence, the jester would finally retire to his quarters. In the stillness of the night, removed from the constant need to perform and entertain, he might allow himself to wonder about the legacy he would leave behind. Would his name be remembered, his cleverest jokes recorded for posterity? Or would he vanish into obscurity, just another forgotten servant in the long history of the court? These quiet moments of reflection reveal the humanity beneath the motley. The jester was not just a symbol or an archetype, but a real person with hopes and fears, dreams and regrets. He might wish for a different life, one where he was valued for something other than his ability to make others laugh. He might long for genuine friendship, for love, for a family of his own. But he also understood that he had been given a rare gift, the ability to bring joy into the world, to lighten the burden of existence for those around him, even if only for a few precious moments. And so, as the candle burned low and sleep finally claimed him, the jester could take comfort in knowing that tomorrow he would rise again, don his motley once more, and continue in his ancient calling. For as long as there were courts and kings, as long as there were people in need of laughter and joy, there would be a place for fools like him. It was not always an easy life, nor a long one, but it was his life, and he lived it as fully and as bravely as he could. Let us now bid good night to our jester. Safely tucked away in his small chamber, his bell silent at last, let us carry with us into our dreams the lessons of his life, that laughter is precious, that truth is powerful, and that even the smallest and most unlikely among us can make a difference in the world. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be filled with the gentle jingling of jesters' bells, echoing softly through the corridors of history. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses